we want to be able to like really now delve into what your thoughts are on the individual experience of trauma in a way that if someone inflicts trauma on themselves and their hair as a result of pain in a very different way, in a very individualized violence, essentially. So it would be really great to hear your thoughts on that.
I mean, when I think about systemic violence, especially when it's correlated to the hair, I often think about the anti-Blackness that we grew up with. We can't talk about trauma and systemic issues without talking about anti-Blackness, because our culture is very entrenched in anti-Blackness, and a lot of people don't talk about it. However, it exists in everyday life, and we also come from a very privileged place where we don't necessarily have the same types of experiences as Black, like African lives, but then we have our own anti-Blackness within South Asia as well. And so how does that play a role in terms of the perception of beauty and the perception of hair care, and the perception of, what is acceptable and what is not acceptable in terms of your hair and your body and everything else in general? Systemic violence definitely engages us in activities that are not healthy in terms of our own perceptions of ourselves, right? And so that often pushes people into doing things that maybe later on in life they'll regret, I know at a place right now in my life, I've grown up my hair. So from here on is like the colored parts, and from here up is my natural hair, right? And so even me, I've had to really work at embracing more of my roots, right? And part of that is growing out my hair and knowing that chemicals are going to affect my hair, especially because I know that I have TMS-like symptoms, right, when it comes to chronic pain and hair loss. So when I started to experience that one episode of that alopecia areata, I was freaking out. But now after that, I was like, dude, I'm gonna, like, my mother never has to chase me around the kitchen anymore to put hair oil in my hair, because I will do that myself. I will eat all the spinach that I never did when I was younger. I thank my mother for a lot of things for teaching me, and now I'm doing the things that I hated and hated. And hating is an understatement. Like, I used to like detest and hide from my mother when she used to like try and make me do things to my hair, and now I'm just like, give me all the oil, like castor oil. Now I put hair food on my head every day. Like, I'm so stressed because of that, right? And part of that is stress management, and part of the healing process of systemic violence and also structural violence is going on your healing journey and figuring out what that means for you. In terms of little kids, right? Let's start with little kids and the way that they communicate. So young children may not have the words to explain to you that they're, anxious, or that they're nervous, or that they're depressed, or that they're sad. Most often what young people say is, "Mommy, Daddy, like, my stomach hurts." And usually it's more than just a hurting stomach. That's their way of telling you that there's something more going on, right? And sometimes that's anxiety. And I remember one of the young people that I had heard about through my colleague. So this young person, I think they were about 4 or 5 years old, and their mom found like a piece of or an area on her scalp that had no hair. And they were confused as to what was going on. And they found out that she was actually picking out her hair, like by hand. And that's why she had the hole. So it wasn't alopecia or anything. It was basically her picking at her hair and taking it out. Part of that is curiosity to see the root of the hair, but the other part is anxiety. So this young person had a lot of anxiety in terms of schooling, and also some of the issues that were going on in her home, right? And also in the system. So she had her parents, her biological parents, but then she was also raised in the child welfare system. And so there was a lot of trauma that was going on. And part of her coping mechanism, and when we think about coping, we often think about, okay, it's probably a positive thing, but sometimes coping mechanisms can be negative, right? And her coping mechanism was to pick at her hair. And that's why her hair, there was hair loss in her scalp. Obviously it grew back. They were given like this lotion, or this topical lotion, and it grew back. But in children, it's so important to really listen to them. And I don't just mean with your ears. I mean with your eyes, with your energy. If the energy is off, something's probably going on, right? If you are seeing them kind of behave a little bit differently, something is probably off. If they're telling you that their stomach is hurting, it's probably not just their stomach, it's something else as well, right? So it's really important to have open communication with young people and not treat them like they're little kids and talk to them in like little baby language. Talk to them as if they have the understanding of what is going on, and they will try their best in terms of how they communicate to let you know what is going on. But when a person says that their stomach is hurting, oftentimes it is stress related, and oftentimes you will see some things manifest in terms of their hair. In terms of the way in which we kind of inflict violence on ourselves. So sometimes, you know, as a way to cope with ourselves, we do things that we think is going to relieve that tension and energy that's building up in us, but essentially we're also hurting ourselves in the process as well. The other thing is that, you know, hair trauma is not necessarily inflicted on ourselves, right? So in domestic violence situations, especially when people have longer hair, sometimes, you know, there's hair pulling that's going on, right? So if you're not listening to me, come back here. Like your hair gets pulled like it's a horse's tail almost, right? Hair is a way for people to I guess elicit or to inflict violence on gender. So that's part of gender-based violence, and that's something that not many people talk about. But inflicting violence on, like, using hair, but also on hair is part of gender-based violence as well.
Awesome, thank you so much. You actually went right into the next segment, which is hair and trauma inflicted by society or by someone else, right? And a lot of times we see in film is like a huge industry that talks about the haircut or that as something that's traumatic, right? And so if you're able to go a bit more into that, what are some ways that trauma is inflicted by perpetrators, and as well, what is your understanding around that?
For example, abuse and violence is very interconnected and very related to power and control. And so even controlling the way a woman wears her hair is part of that control as well, part of that hair trauma as well, right? Sometimes a person may not want other people to find you attractive. And so they'll make you do things to your hair that in their mind will make you look unattractive to everybody else around you. The other thing is, you know, forcing people to shave their hair as well, right? So even, and so basically, I think I was in grade 1 or 2, and there was a lice outbreak in the school. And so for my mom, the easiest thing for her to do was shave off all of my hair. I was 7 or 8 years old. That is not the time to be bald, okay? And there's bullying in school. Like, there's bullying.
I can imagine. Oh my goodness.
I remember those days.
Like, she literally just like, and the thing is, I never had a barber either. My mom was my barber, my cook, everything, right? So my mom just took like a shaver and she just zapped all of my hair off. And it was one of the most traumatic events of that portion of my life, because you just took my identity away from me. That made me a girl in my mind, because I was taught that you have to have longer hair in order to be a girl. But also other people around me who are my classmates are taught the same thing. So when they saw me, oh man, like I still remember them looking at me and making fun of me because they're just like, where's your hair? Like, oh, you're a guy now and whatever. And it was really traumatizing for me, and I will never do that to my own kid. Like, I don't care how much lice outbreak is going on in schools. Like, there's no way I'm going to be shaving my kids' hair off, because that actually leaves an impression on the young person, right? On top, especially on top of complex trauma. So if you're already going through abuse in your home, if you're already a survivor of different types of violences. So I know for me, I'm a survivor of childhood sexual abuse as well as being marginalized within the community for quote unquote looking different or acting different or whatever, even from like when I was 6 years old. And so I'm already at a loss in so many ways. And then now I'm losing my hair too. And so that really compounded the issues for me. And it's so important for parents to also know that these things although they seem very, you know, logical to do because you are combating like health crises, it's not always the best thing. And it's important to have these conversations with your young people because young people have hearts too and feelings too. It's not just adults that have hearts and feelings as well.